next, I want to share the time lapse that I did. Where is it? All right, let me just share the screen. Here we go. Okay, so I started with the background here. You can see I began it, but as I began, I was like, you know what? I should be filming this. Let me stop and then do a time lapse. So here we go. So I'm going through the background and I'm trying to put everything into context as far as light and dark. So I know the background is a very, very light, kind of bluish color. And it happened kind of quickly, but you could see in the bottom of the painting, I also colored the background green. Now it's a very similar color to the green is a very similar color to the background color that we began with. So it happened very quickly and very subtle, but you can see kind of like a before and after. So, and right after I finished the background, let's see, I go into the tabletop there. So you can see it's a very light green, right? And it's just a kind of like a skim coat. It's just a glazing effect, right? It's a very thin amount of paint. It goes on, and we're just trying to knock out all the big sections that will help us put all of our other colors into context. All right, so I'm doing all my dark areas again, my shadow areas, areas that I know that are simple to block in. And then after I finished all my dark areas, I immediately switched to whites. Now I kind of jumped the gun here on the left-hand side with this folded fabric here on the left side of the bowl. And I started putting in shadow shapes, but I realized I should probably go back and just continue with my light shapes. So that's the method that we're going to use today. So we did the first coat of white. So remember, white is our opaque color. All the other colors have a translucency to them. They're kind of like cellophane, right? They have color, but you can see through them. Whereas the white acts as an eraser. It's a very opaque color. So the whites I'm going to apply to the cloth, the fruit, and all the leaves that really have a high, like a high color index, right? So the very bright leaves will get a layer of white to begin. So you can see I added the white to the oranges, right? All the light spots of the orange, and now I'm doing the leaves that have a high key, key light. And then after the white dries, which is almost immediately, then I start to glaze with the other colors, and you can start seeing them come to life. So any of the colors any of the leaves that don't have white on them, you can see when we put the greens on them, they become a much deeper, darker green. All right, and this is it's a little misleading as far as time goes because it did take me. I was taking my time and kind of having fun with it, but it did take me a good 3 hours to do. So we're kind of like 3 hours and counting. A lot of it I was just trying to figure out, and it was like trying to figure out a puzzle when you don't know the solution. So now that I do have a good idea of where I want to go, we can begin painting. So I wish this was a little bit sharper. Maybe if I get more light. All right, so I have my camera on the canvas. So this is pretty much where we're starting. I'm pretty sure everybody is here, right? We worked on our drawing. Hopefully it's been completed since last week, because right now this week we're going to jump straight into color, right? Beginning with the background, tabletop below the table here, and then we're going to start adding our key lights, right, with the white by itself. And then after we're done with the white, we're going to start adding our colors over the top, like in thin layers, kind of like cellophane, colored cellophane over our base painting here, right? And hopefully this will be the finished effect. But if you don't have, if we do run out of time, we don't have the full finished painting, you will have a pretty good playbook of where to go with the painting and how to get there. And then it's just literally observing your source and just taking your time and kind of having fun with it, right? So again, this is Let me share my screen again. So this is our source photo, right? So uh, um, these greens I found very difficult to mix because it's a very electric green. Also, we don't know, we're not even sure if this photo's been doctored. Sometimes photos that are uploaded, right, can be augmented with filters or, certain color adjustments in Photoshop. So a lot of this electric kind of green colors, it could be in real life, in reality, a much dimmer, much more muted color. But since I got this off the internet, I'm not really sure, right? So we're going to do our best because with the greens that we have, the color pigments that we have, it's not always the highest key. When we mix them, they actually become much more muted and a little bit, closer to gray, especially when we mix with white. Colors mixed with white tend to take on a grayish tinge, right? So unless you're getting a very bright color straight from the tube, it's almost impossible to mix this kind of electric green, right? Or these electric yellows. We're going to get close. We're going to do our best, but to get these real high key yellow, these yellow greens, we would need probably like a cadmium yellow or cadmium, something with cadmium in it. The cadmium colors tend to be very, very bright and very high key colors, right? So, like I said, I did my absolute best, and we're going to get close. All right. So, with that having said, I also pointed out my palette here. So this is my old palette. This is what I use to actually get my colors, and you can see there's a lot of pools of green, right? So I started out with my three primaries, the yellow, red, blue that you've been given, but we also have a green and black, and I use those to make some greens, and we're gonna do that first. I really hope that you guys have kind of invested in some kind of palette knife because it really does make mixing colors a lot easier. If you only have a brush, that's fine too. You can get by, but as far as mixing colors, you get to keep, like 99% of the color that you mix. Whereas brushes, you can mix the color, but you can't quite get all the paint out of the brush. And when you clean off the brush, you wind up losing, it could be 10 to 20% of the amount of color that you've mixed. So you constantly have to, mix new colors, and that's problematic because you're not always going to get the exact same color in case you run out, right? So I mixed several kind of reservoirs of paint, and then I would dip and mix from those reservoirs. So let's start out with that. I'm going to put out my paints, and I'm going to do white, yellow, red on the left side of my palette. My camera's kind of off skew, right? So I'm actually standing here, right, facing my desk in the painting. So my palette is vertical, but you're looking at it as if it's horizontal. But the orientation is not so important, right? But the areas in which you put your paints can be, strategic. So I have my yellow, white, yellow, red. So the yellows and reds are going to be important for the browns that we're going to make. Yellow and blue also for the greens, right? Because we're not just going to use this green from the tube, although it will help us in some regards. So then I have my darker colors along my other side of the palette. So I'm going to have my phthalo blue over here. The phthalo blue appears as kind of like a very dark inky color on camera. And just for context, here's my black. They almost look exactly the same, but there is definitely a difference there. I'm trying to get a good light here. There, you can see it, right? Much different. So there's our green that we're using and our yellow and red. Okay, so for greens, all right, so we have our green here. So we could take this green and we can augment this green. I'm going to take just an arbitrary amount there, and I'm going to mix kind of like an equal number or equal amount of yellow for this green, and I'm going to create a more yellowish green here, right? That makes sense. It appears to be slightly more yellow than the original green. Now, just the same, green is really yellow and blue, right? Those two wavelengths kind of mixing together to make green. So I added more yellow to this green. I can also add more blue to this green to get a second green. Now, what mixing your own colors does is it creates a color harmony, right? It's a natural way to create color harmony when you're mixing all your colors from the same colors. They will all, naturally work together on the canvas. They're all related, right? So now you can see we have this darker green. So as I'm mixing, I want you guys to also mix your colors just so we can, just so that you're not losing out on any time when we're painting. So let's see if I can get another good view of that paint. So, I mean, you can see this is a yellowish green. This is more of a bluish green. Now there's a green that we can get naturally out of mixing just yellow and blue, right? So foregoing this other green that we have, we can also, okay, we can also get another green by mixing the yellow and blue by itself. So I'm going to clean up my palette knife, right? So just so I don't contaminate it with these other colors, I'm going to wet it, wipe it off on my rag here. So I'm starting with a clean knife. Now, yellow is much weaker than the blue. So I'm going to put a significant amount of yellow because yellow is probably the one of the color that transmits other colors very easily, right? So if you compare the amount of yellow to blue, it's almost no comparison, right? It's just a slight amount of blue, and you can already see that blue is completely taking over this pile. So you can say it's like a 3-to-1 ratio, or maybe a 4-to-1 ratio of yellow to blue. So if you were doing drops, I guess, just to make it mixing paint more formulaic so you can find colors easier, you could even do it in drops, right? So if you take your tube of paint, right, or your palette knife, right, say you drop, you take your nozzle and you make 3 equal drops of paint, and then you take your blue paint and you add 1 equal drop of blue, and you mix that up, right? That's a very easy way of remembering how you made a certain color. All right, so now you can see this green it's a different, trying to get these colors to show on camera. So this green seems to be a little bit more saturated, right? So you have this blue green, this yellowish green. We have our green oxide, okay? So it's like kind of like a dull green or like a drab green. And then here you have more of an electric green, right? So maybe if I spread it out a little bit. Kind of hard to get it with the glare. Let's see, it shows up better here. There we go. Okay, so this shows up much better. So we have our green oxide, our yellow green, our bluish green, all made from the oxides. And then we have this green made from yellow and blue by itself to make this electric kind of green.
Okay.
And then,
Sam,
yes?
sorry, just a question. I'm using the paints that the library provided us,
Yep.
and from what I see on your palette, the color is very muted, where mine is very electric. Am I dropping a little bit of red to kind of neutralize it, or I can keep it so bright? And I can show you my palette.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm gonna.
Let me see where I am.
I'm gonna just pin yours too.
Can you see?
Oh, I see. Yeah. So absolutely, you could take a little bit of red, drop it in there, and that will bring the light down. Now that green would be good for your high key leaves here. Like here,
Yep.
I had to do like a lot of mixing to get that high key. But it sounds like if you add yellow to it and a little bit of white, you're gonna get that green pretty nailed down.
Yeah, I just noticed that yours were a little bit more on the olive side.
Right, because yeah, my green, I'm working with a green oxide. I don't have the same exact green. I think you're dealing with more of like a grass green, which is
Yes.
it's probably close to this one, right? So I just made what you already started out with. So this green oxide would be like that green added, like you said, with a little bit of red, right?
Okay.
And yeah, and then you could play around with that. And then the last green that I want to show you is just yellow and black. I know it doesn't seem like it's possible, but it turns out that these two pigments, when they do mix, make a greenish hue. So I'm going to take a little bit of this yellow. I'm going to put it down here by the black, and I'm just going to take a tiniest little bit of black, right? So this is kind of like, looks more like a, 8-to-1 or 10-to-1 ratio, just a tiny bit of black. And when you mix, and this will be a great green for the leaves that are in shadow. All right, so any of those leaves that don't appear in direct light, or if they're in the cast shadow of another object, we're going to get this like inky kind of weird green. And it's just black and yellow. And mine appears very dark. So here's that yellow and black over here. Now, just to show you a little bit more accurate, I'm going to lighten it up. I'm going to do another lighter version here. So it's just black and yellow. And then two different concentrations. So notice I'm not adding white to any of these. Adding white to this right now would be kind of disastrous. We don't want to add any white to these paints because that'll change the nature of how they behave, right? We want them to act like translucent layers on top of the things that we're going to be building off here. Okay, we don't want to completely cover these things. We kind of want these lights and darks to play through, right? The colors that we put on top. All right, so this is as close as a glazing class as we get into, right? Because glazing takes a lot of practice, time, and experience and patience. So as far as a two-part painting, I think this is kind of fun, right? It's something different. You guys are not really used to this. It's kind of when we do these painting classes a la prima, it's all at one shot, and you got to do everything all at the same time. So I was really hoping that I could show this successfully, this kind of approach to painting. All right, so let's start with the background. And the background, if you notice the source photo, let's see it. It looks like white and blue, but it doesn't look like a clean white and blue. Like there's these tinges of yellows and greens and a little bit of that brown, so it's showing through. So you can see these little holes, right, in the background in the upper hand corner, right? Some of that background that we've been working on is allowed to show, okay? And I would encourage you to kind of let those relationships create themselves. You don't have to glob on all the paint and cover it all at once. Okay, so the first step is we're going to, let's see, if I'm here, let's see if I can. Oh, okay.
Sorry, Sam, we're still mixing. Can we have like a minute?
Yeah,
Thank you.
no problem. While you do that, I'm going to fix the exposure on this camera. That's a little bit better. That's a lot better. All right. So while you're mixing, remember the key is mix enough paint where you'll have enough to last you the whole painting, right? So you don't want to do these little drops of paint. Think of like the size of a quarter or maybe even a $50. Be generous with the paints that you mix because once you run out, it's going to be impossible to match the exact same ratios that you started out with, right? You can always change these puddles, right, on the fly. We're going to be mixing and matching in between these puddles as well. But as far as starting out, this is a great place to start out, right? So you have your original green, you add yellow, you add blue, and then you make another green totally different with just the yellow and blue, and then another green with just yellow and black. Now for the background, I'm going to mix another reservoir here. So just to keep it away from my other colors, I took white, placed it over here. I'm going to take a little bit of blue. And you also, it would do well if you mixed it lighter than you think it should be. So I think I mentioned in another class a while back, a funny story about my friend Fish. Anyway, the thing is, when you mix colors, they look lighter than they do when they dry. So whenever you mix a color and it looks nice and bright, it's gonna darken as it dries. So if you think a color is perfectly mixed for the background, you think, oh wow, this is the perfect lightness. Chances are it's gonna be darker when it's dry. Mix it to be a little bit lighter. So here's my blue for the background, right? I'm gonna mix a little bit more white because right now it just looks too spot on. Now, I don't want to dwell on the background or the table because the meat and potatoes of this is the orange and the leaves. You can always go back, say if you don't have enough time to do the other areas. Um, and another thing I didn't want to dwell too much on was the cloth, but you know, that is a major component. It's one of the lightest things in the entire painting. But the most technically demanding parts are the leaves and the oranges. So I do want to spend some time there. So here's my background white. Now I will be adding, after when I'm starting to do my background, right, I'm going to use kind of like a medium-sized flat brush. I'm going to be mixing in some of this green here. So this green with yellow, I will be taking a small amount of that, and then when I add it to the background, I'm going to be adding just a smidge of that just to kind of harmonize the back. I don't want it to be just white and blue. I want some of those other colors to sneak in there. All right, so you can see that it's not entirely just white and blue. It doesn't look blue, especially on this camera. It has a greenish tinge to it, and it matches, it harmonizes very well with the other colors, right? All right, so how are we doing with pre-mixing our colors? I want to keep marching on here.
All good here. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, cool. So I'm going to take my medium brush. Another good brush to use if you ever get a chance, right, is a dagger brush. So a brush that has a slight angle, because then you could use the tip for any fine point areas, but then you can also use the flat edge, flat broad edge, and it does make a nice edge on itself too. So you could do straight lines, you could do tiny little details with this corner here, right? And then you can also do wide areas with the wide edge. So this is a pretty versatile brush and a nice little addition to the brush family, right? So here is my brush. So I'm going to pick up my light background color, and you can see very, very bright, right? It has just the slightest tinge of blue. And I'm not too worried about covering every little aspect of this. I want my brush strokes to be visible, right? You can see I'm not trying to get this smooth, um, you know, uniformly spread out paint and stuff, right? I'm trying to have fun with this. The thing I want to do is maintain my my leaves here. I don't want to interfere with them too much. So I'm going to take my time around the leaves. And just like I said before, I can also pick up just a little bit of this green here, right? So without cleaning my brush, I picked up a little bit of the green, and I can just throw that right on top of my other color. And there you can see the difference. Some of that green is shining through, and that white and blue, you know, they're playing very nicely together. It'll give you a nice, interesting background that's varied. And I'm doing a lot of tapping and then changing direction. I'm tapping and pull, tap and pull. When I get close to the leaves, you know, I'll slow down, and I want to get the profile of those leaves. But as soon as I get to kind of like open space here, it's tap, pull, and changing the direction, trying to vary my brush strokes here. And after you have a section of the white and blue, just take a little tinge of that yellow green and just mix it in. Same exact approach. Tap, pull, and you'll get a wonderfully varied background. Okay, so for the next couple of minutes or so, we're going to be tackling this background. I will be switching brushes to get into the more intricate areas in between the leaves. Because remember, part of the construction of the drawing of our painting was all these negative spaces. So all these little points here, I want to pay attention to the source. So I'm going to share that again. And in between all these leaves, I'm going to be focusing on these shapes, right? And when I do these background shapes, the leaf, the shape of the leaf will really pop out, right? So you can be as intricate as possible. So you can see right here, you get these very tiny marks. If I zoom out, you can see how small they are, right? You're going to definitely have to switch to another brush when you do those other areas, right? So we're going to focus on all the large areas first. Make sure you're also painting around these shadow shapes because that will get a different approach to it. So anything that's the same color you want to be tackling now, and these shapes in between the leaves, right? So those are our negative shapes again. That's what we'll call them. Now this is too bright. Okay, I think that's a little bit better. So I'm letting some of that underpainting shine through. Avoid using water to spread out your paint because that will give you a very uniform amount of color. So if you want to erase all brush strokes, by all means, paint with a wet brush. If you want any kind of variety in your brush stroke, you only want to use the paint. Now, since the background is nice and bright, I am using the higher key yellow and green. I want it to appear nice and bright. If you wind up using too much green, like you see, get this high spot right here, I can go over it with the white and blue and just knock it back down. Like so. Right, and we keep it moving. So the best time to add that yellow and green is when the paint is still wet. So just going back and forth because it'll mix in right on the canvas. If you wait too long, say you just do all the white and blue at once, and then by the time you get to the beginning, go with the yellow and green. Now the yellow and green just lays over on top, just like that cellophane effect that I'm talking about. And you won't see any of that white and blue kind of transmitted through anymore. You'll see it through the filter of the yellow green. But we don't want that. We want kind of the colors playing with each other right off the bat. So it has to be wet on wet. I feel like in the larger areas, I really can cut loose and just let my paintbrush fly and really mess around with the different angles and shapes that I can make, different brush strokes. Don't be afraid to paint right up to the edge of the surrounding shapes. And I'm being careful to paint around the shadow shapes, right? Because that will be a different color. I'm just about ready to switch my brush and go to a smaller brush to paint inside of these other details that I have. Okay, so the large areas done. I'm going to switch my brush. I'm going to start doing all these negative shape areas. Now yours, depending on how you drew yours, you might have omitted some of those areas, which is fine. You'll have to do some inventive painting in between, right? Maybe you're going to create your own leaf shapes, right? Maybe some things overlap a little slightly differently, but you'll have more or less that roadmap to kind of get the effects that you would like to get. So I know these were the most prominent ones, these three guys here. One, right, and two. So I'm using a small round brush now. I'm using my pinky to, just like a kickstand of a bike, to put on the painting, make sure it's in a dry area. And then with my other hand, I'm choking way up. This is a much smaller brush, so I have, long handle brushes and short handle brushes. So this one's a good one for detail. And my grip is very light. I'm just holding it basically two fingers and supporting with a third one here, and using my pinky as a support. So I know you've probably seen artists in the past where they have a large stick right across their painting. Some call it a maul, right? So something like this, right? This is meant to either lean on a piece of wood or on the edge of the canvas. And then you would actually rest your hand on this and then paint off of that, right? So if this was, if I had a large easel here, there would be a piece of wood here. I would put this laying on the wood, and now this bar would be floating in front of the canvas, kind of like this, and then my hand would rest on this bar. Right, so some artists have really long ones. They're like 6 foot. They're like staffs. So it would be on the floor, and they're holding it with the other hand. And with this one, they would lean on it, and then get a nice stable place to rest their hand. So this little negative shape here, see if I can zoom in there. This little negative shape here, it's kind of flat here because that's the tip of the jug. And then this little jagged insert, right, this little V shape, makes the leaf shape here behind it stand out all that more, right? So you have the leaf here, and this blue kind of weird little color here, the shape, makes that really pop out. So you can see I have two more of those triangles. I have one here and one here. Once I make those blue, you'll really be able to see the leaf shapes that are exist there. All right, so here's now depending on how detailed you made your initial painting, your underpainting slash drawing, they might be there for you, they might not. Adding a little bit of that yellow green to knock it down some. Okay. I think, let's see, I'm gonna double check the other painting. Okay, so here are those um, three negative shapes here. Here's my other negative shape. I have this thin one along this leaf. I have one in front of the jug and the two triangles, and I think that about does it. You have these little guys up here, which we could paint in. It depends on how much detail you want to put in, right? You have this one little blue shape here towards the top, this little guy to show separation from this leaf and this leaf, and these three here. I might just simplify that to just this one, right? So on my canvas, I only have this one little shape here. I didn't have all that other variety in it. So I'm just going to put in a little bit of that blue and white. I think I'll call that done. Oh, I wanted to check over here. Oh, so here in between these leaves, there's that thin run. So here. So you basically know what we're trying to accomplish with these shapes. So whatever shapes that you have on your canvas, just, try to fill in the background to where you want it. And that'll make it your painting, right? It's a little bit more individual to you rather than trying to do a carbon copy of the painting that we're studying. Oh, in front of the jug, I know there was this space here. So, and I'm going to check the source. I'm not sure if these were shadow shapes or if they were the same color as the background. I'm looking just above the jug here, right around the handle where these three leaves kind of hang out. There's this shape and this shape. And I'm going to double check that. Let's see. All right. Oh, wow. So you can see that there's two different colors here. So we have the bright background, and then some of it is actually cut by shadow. So we could add that. We could add these little marks of light blue, and then later on we're going to come with this more muted blue for the shadow shape as soon as we finish with these negative shapes here. So on the left side of these negative shapes, It was just a hint of light blue sneaking through. Cool. Okay, washing off my brush. And sip of coffee. Trying to hide some of that light. So you can see it's not perfectly uniform, all the colors. So if you look at my background here, I have some of the light blue shining through, some of that greenish yellow kind of shining through. Depending on how you want your canvas to appear, right? You could want it all uniform, but I kind of like adding the greens because that'll play nicely with the other greens. Now, if these greens look a little too saturated for you or too bright, you can go over it with another layer of the white and blue and just kind of go back and forth with that. But we don't, like I said, we don't want to dwell here because there's a lot more to cover. And I want to put some time into that as well. All right. Overall, how many people have finished their light background colors right now? All right, good. Robin, let's see, where's everybody else? I think everybody has their cameras off. I can't tell. All right, nobody's in the chat. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the muted color here. Now, I'm still working on the background. So the background is anything above this table line, right? We could call that the horizon line too. Anything above that, that's what I'm working on in the background. We're not yet looking at the shadows on the table because that will be a different color than the wall shadow, okay? And just to prove that, so you can see the shadow colors change drastically. Although the shadow is continuous, right? It's the shadow of the jug that starts on the table and then continues on through the wall. It's two different colors. This is a dark green, right? If I was to zoom in way in on just those areas, just here, we have a muted, like kind of grayish blue, and then here we have a grayish green or a brownish green. But they're both there to define the shadow of the jug, okay? So right now we're just gonna do the wall shadow. So I'm gonna go back to my, let's see, my flat. So I'm going to like my medium size flat just to get these areas quickly done. I almost dipped it in my coffee. All right, so I'm going to take my light blue that I have. I'm thinking color harmony. I don't have much left. I should have taken my own advice and mixed more, right? So I have my light blue. That's just the white and the phthalo blue. And then I'm going to mix, let's see, a little bit more blue just to darken it. Now that in itself will get me pretty close. However, it's too clean, right? It's too sharp, it's too bright. It just looks like blue, a lighter blue. So what can we do to get that a little bit murky, right? So I'm going to try this out. I'm going to try my yellow and black mixture. So this is the lighter version. So I have two versions. I have kind of like a deep version. I'll go back to, so I have a light version and a deep version, but it's just yellow and the black in these two piles. I'm going to take the lighter version and I'm just going to grab a corner of it, right? Because I can know, you know, black mixed in other colors can be somewhat problematic. And I'll get this murky kind of grayish green, right? So the black mixed in with the white will kind of give me that natural gray color. And then that blue and yellow will also play together and give me this greenish blue color also. So, all right, so we have four colors mixed in here that we probably couldn't have mixed any other way. It would have been a lot more difficult. So here are the colors. It was white and blue to begin with, and then I had a pre-mixture of yellow and black, right? And added in such a small amount that I couldn't even quantify that. And then I get this color here. So it's a little bit about experimentation. Speaking of experimentation, I'm going to lay it down here. Now, if you look at it, it still looks a little too light. It's still too similar. I'm going to put it right next to that color in the handle, right? It still looks too high key. So I'm going to knock it down even more. I'm going to add a little bit more blue to darken it. And a little bit more of that yellow black, that green that we made. Now the blue is overpowering this still. So I still get a nice kind of murky kind of blue. All right, and this looks like a muted version of that first color that we started out with. So I'm going to add that in. Now that's a lot darker. That's a little bit more appropriate for this area. You can see where my original color was. Be careful to not paint over those leaf shapes because I had two leaves kind of hiding out in that corner. And actually, when I paint this, I'm seeing some of my underpainting showing through, which is just fine. It's kind of like the point. Let some of that orangey brown kind of vibrate against our bright new colors that we're laying on top. I'm also adding the shadow color in between or inside the jug handle. And there was a little tiny space between this branch. There's a branch sneaking in behind that jug handle there. You can already see the relationship between the handle and the background. We're getting that nice kind of shadow effect. So I said in this shape, half of it was that bright background color and the other was shadow. I got a little bit on the jug there, but that's okay. I think one thing my drawing I left out on was the shadow shapes of those three leaves. Yeah, okay, so I have two shadow shapes that I actually forgot to draw in. So you can see how they're just bright white here. That might be a little problematic because now I have the white underneath. So hopefully you remember to paint in the shadow shapes beforehand. I'm going to put them in now and see what happens. Let's, all right, wrong button. All right, so put in one shadow shape here. And the other touches this edge here. And there's a little space right at the tip of the leaf, right about there. All right, that'll work. And I think that still reads as a shadow shape, even though it's like slightly brighter than I would like it, but c'est la vie. Right. Okay, so now we're going to be moving on to the table area. And again, if we look at our source, it's like this muted kind of green color. All right, so I'm looking at these two greens, right? So they place, here's our bluish green and here's our yellowish green. And we already pre-mixed these colors. However, they're still, they look a little bit brighter than this. So just like Demon was saying before, we can add a little red to knock them down a little bit. Right, yeah, I think I want to do that. So first step, we're going to take our flat brush. I'm going to grab my light yellow. So This was the first green. I had this green here. I mixed it with yellow. You can take this green and just take a little bit of red, add it to that. And that'll neutralize it a little bit, give it a little reddish tone. You still want it to be green. Too much red, and it's going to look orange or brown, right? We still want that green color. And I'm just going to apply it right to this, and you can see it goes on very thinly, which is good. We don't want to mix white in here because that'll completely kind of wipe over the underpainting.
Sorry, Sam, I spaced out a little bit. Which green did you take for the table surface?
It's the yellowish green.
Yellowish green. Okay,
So yeah, that was the first. So that green that we first had, I added yellow to it and got this yellowish green. And then from here, I know on yours you have that brighter green.
Yep.
So we added some red to it to knock it down to make it a little bit more muted.
Got
Right?
it. Thank you.
When you put it on the canvas, the colors that we have before will also, shine through, and it'll knock it down even further. So it should be just right. Now, if you try to paint too much over here, right? It's just a very thin layer of paint, right? If you continuously try to add paint to the surface, I mean, what will happen is it'll stick and you'll get these bald spots. You see how I just did that here? I did that on purpose just to show you. If you continuously try to add paint and add layers without letting it sufficiently dry. So this is tacky. If you grab more paint and you start to add it here, it's going to rip it off, and then you're going to wind up getting a bald spot. Looks like it. So any of the paint here kind of ripped off and just kind of laid over here. So you want to avoid that. Do one layer, and then we're going to move on to the next section. Okay. I'm not even going to wind up cleaning my brush. I'm going to go to my bluish green section here, and I'm going to, right, without cleaning my brush, if I put these colors in here and I apply that, I've just harmonized these two colors, right? So going back to the canvas, I have this color here. I've taken the bluish green, and now I'm adding it down here. And now it's one table, and it's the same color. Meaning in real life, if you had a table, it would be the same color. It's not like our tables have one color on the top and another color on the sides. It's just a difference in light, which gives it the illusion of having a different color. So you can see painting in these thin layers can be a little bit tricky because you can get these uneven amounts of paint, and your instinct is to keep, moving the brush over and over in the same spot to try to even it out. What that winds up doing is ripping the paint off in some cases because the paint dried too quickly, and then you get a bald spot. So initially you want to get the paint down, spread it around, and move on. So you can see I kind of have like these low spots and high spots with paint. I don't want to dwell there too much because I know I'm just going to get in trouble. We can always come back and add another layer of paint. And don't forget this little corner here on the side. So here we had drawn that diagonal here, and we showed just the tiniest bit of that edge of the table over here, and then that shadow underneath. So this corner over here gets treated with the same colors over here. right, and then for this green, for this shadow area here, for the jug, I'm going to switch to, I'm not going to clean my brush either. I'm going to grab this yellow and black mixture here. So this was my lighter reservoir. This is my darker one. I'm going to grab the darker one. And I'm just going to pick it up on the edge here. And I'm going to add it right over. Now, you notice it has a very low opacity. It's very translucent. So it's going to pick up any of the browns from our below, from our underpainting, right? So that's pretty much the theme of the day. We're going to let the underpainting kind of help us along. I believe the shadow of our cloth is also, could be that same color. Let's see. Yeah, so here, this dark border that's following the cloth is actually the cast shadow, right? So light is hitting the cloth, and then the cloth is putting a shadow on the table as well, and that's this dark band of paint here. So we're going to be adding that as well. So there's still that yellow and black mixture. Now, if your colors appear too green, my suggestion would be to add a little bit of red to it. So here's my yellow and black. If I take a little bit of that red and I add it to it, you get a much richer, you can see right here, you get this nice rich kind of brown color. So if you want, if your shadow colors are really too green, you can add just a little bit of red, right? Just a little corner, and just bounce that into your color, right? We want to kind of avoid the swirls. Whenever I mix colors, I kind of bounce in one area. Swirling will just flatten out all your paints on your plate or your palette. It'll dry up and it'll be unusable. So we might want to do that a little bit later on. Let this first layer kind of dry. Yeah, you see, I'm playing too much in this corner here and it's just tearing right off. I don't want that. All right, so I'm gonna have to come back and fix that. All right, so now you've had the background is a good place to kind of play and get to and familiarize ourselves with how this approach is going to work. All right, so for the most part, we've done either large, sections or kind of like these geometric sections, just the tabletop, the edge here. But we've already, dealt with the relationships of the underpainting and the layers that we put on top. Next thing we're going to do, that's as good as it gets. Okay, so next we're going to focus on the high spots of the painting. So if I were to gonna go to that time lapse again and find where I did the high spots. So pause. Okay. Okay. So now with the white paint, right, we're just going to start adding in thin amounts on the highest, on the brightest spots of the canvas. We're going to be putting that opaque white paint because in these sections, we really want those colors to sing and we don't want any kind of mixture of the background to interfere, right? This muted kind of brownish color. We don't want that to interfere with our nice bright colors. So here is kind of like we're going to erase some of the background and we're going to create these areas of bright light areas. Okay. So now with a round brush, right, I'm going to take my nice round brush, going to wet it, take out all the extra water, and with just plain white paint, I'm really, so what I'm doing is I'm trying to saturate my brush with just the white paint. And that's just, so in this brush, there's a lot of fibers, right? And just picking up one layer, just one swipe of paint really doesn't cut it so much. Why is that so bright? So I'm just going to tap and pull just this one white color just to saturate the inside of this brush, the outside of this brush, and all the surface area on the outside, right? So I have a nice loaded brush. And I'm going to take my loaded white brush and now I'm going to start to identify all those light areas. So I'm going to start with the fruit first. All right, so any of these light areas here is a good place to begin. Now, keeping in mind the shape of the fruit, right? So these are round objects. So you don't want to just do, how should I say, like these big flat kind of shapes. So I'm adding, as you can see, I'm just tapping my brush along. And fruit, they do have pores. So you can leave little gaps of the background to show through. And the lighter you press, the less white that's going to come out on your canvas. Right, so the areas that are closest to the light source, which is coming down from the left, right, all our shadows are being shot up to the right, so that means our light source is to the left. This is where your brightest areas are going to be, and as you move across the fruit, it's going to be less and less white. Okay, so these colors over here, the white over here can be applied very dryly, right, like a dry brush effect. So saturated, thick, brush strokes on the left. As you move towards the center of the fruit, they can become more sparse, right? Not all your brush strokes have to connect, like so. And as you move further through the fruit, you can press lighter and lighter and have your brush strokes even more separated, right? So you're creating like a gradient of light. And that'll be a fantastic base for colors to go on top of. Okay, so you can already see how that white is really popping out. So if you thought it was really, three-dimensional before, this is going to take it to the next level here. I'm going to start on the next root. On the left edge, it's going to be very saturated. Towards the center, start to break up my brush strokes. And as I move to the right side of the fruit, very dry brush strokes, almost, I'm not even, I'm just scraping the canvas. Think of like, just like a feather, just kind of like tapping on the canvas stage, just the slightest amount of paint. And the same thing, I'm just gonna double check my source here that yeah. So you can see that this orange here has the most saturated yellows, right? These brightest, the highest key yellows, I should say. Then here it's less so because it's closest to the light source over here, right? And then the lemon, since it's the brightest color here, it has the brightest yellows out of all the fruit. Okay, and then you have this cast shadow. I love this cast shadow in this orange. You can see how the cast shadow takes the shape of the orange. It curves, right? So we should have that in our preliminary drawing. So here you could see I have that curve there. And right now I'm going to continue working on the brights. Right. You can already see I have a dot here, right? That was the initial dot that I left. And then when I started talking, it actually dried. So when I started to cover over again, now this area has two layers of white versus the one layer. So even though white is an opaque color, um, it can be built up. These whites aren't like super saturated. I guess the more professional brands of paint have a higher concentration of pigment, where once you put that white down, it's kind of like a solid smack of white. There's not too much translucency there. But as far as acrylics, it's pigments inside that acrylic polymer, that liquid, like a clear liquid. Let's see what kind of consistency does it have? It's like a thick, it's like, almost like honey. And when it dries up to be that plasticky kind of color, plasticky feel to it. I think I have, or I had. If you ever open up a bottle of acrylics, you see that film that's there. You can just kind of peel off. That's that plastic polymer. The professional acrylic paints, are like 80 or higher percent of pigment to polymer ratio, whereas the lower brands tend to have it closer to 50 or even less pigment, right? So you have more of that polymer gel than pigment. So when you're expecting a nice solid color, you don't always get it because that's not what you bought. So sometimes, as far as art supplies, getting what you pay for is a thing. So there's that little sneak of white paint. So this is still that orange, right? Oh, I forgot this little section. If right in here, oh, is this possible? So right in here, this is actually the background. I forgot to color in this little negative shape here. And this is the left side of the orange, right? So this edge is the leaf. This edge is the leaf, and it's being blocked out. The light is being blocked on this orange by that leaf there. So I'm actually gonna, oh boy, I ran out of my background color. Let me make that real quick. All right, let's see, get that in there. Almost lost that edge, and I'm gonna knock it down with a little bit of that green that we did before. Maybe some more. Okay. Oops. All right, so after you do your fruit, you're going to do the same thing to the leaves. So any of the leaves that don't have the that dark brown, right? So that gradient of brown that we put on, if it doesn't have that, those are your leaves that are going to get a layer of white. So again, I'll grab my brush. So the brightest sections will go on the left side because that's closest to our light source. And for the leaves, I'm going to leave the spine of the leaf somewhat exposed. I'm not going to cover that with white paint. I want the underpainting to kind of shine through. All right, so I'm using much less white paint as I go away from that initial edge. So I'm concentrating my paint over here, and as I go over here, I'm painting much lighter, much softer, leaving less white, less paint there. And same thing down here. Leaving that spine. One thing I did notice that as I finished my painting, I was pleased with the results, but it did feel a little stiff. I thought maybe I gave myself too much time to work on it. So kind of like speeding through this keeps my brush strokes a little bit looser. So I'm curious to see how this version will hold up against the other version. All right, so I'm going to add it to this leaf here, front and center. So the center of this leaf, I'm going to leave it pretty bright. And as I go to the right side of the leaf, it's going to be less white. Like so. Let's see, I know this guy. So for these secondary leaves, I don't want them to outshine my bright leaves. So I'm just kind of dry brushing some of that white on there, just to give it a thin amount of white, because I really want those other leaves to kind of sing through. The greens that we make with those leaves, I want that to really shine. Put a little bit of white there. And then for these spines over here, I'm just going to let the the drawing that we initially did last week, I'm going to let that stand. I don't need any white on those spines there. Just the lack of paint and the white of the board shining through which should be enough to make that stand out later on. Brush. Oh, I forgot. The other parts that we can paint white are the edge of the bowl. So if you look at this bright front edge, this front lip, you get a really high key yellow. It's like the same yellow as the lemon there. And you can even see this thin white highlight. We can add that at the very end, where it's just the light that's the highlight of the kind of like porcelain or the paint that's on the bowl. We can add that last. Don't worry about that up front. And then I think after that, we can jump into the cloth. All right, and as far as the time goes, it's 2:21. I'm just going to keep powering along here. So for the white on the blanket, to me, one of the most obvious places to start is in this big, broad, flat area over here. It has a very like high key white. So I'm careful not to paint over the shadow areas. So anything that had brown denoting shadow last time, we need to preserve those areas. So don't paint white over everything. Otherwise, it's kind of like you're erasing all that work that you did before. If you're wondering, like, why is my white so bright here? Like, if you could see some of your brushstroke coming through, I guarantee you it's not as bright as it might seem in person. I think it's just the camera and the way it's picking up the light. I can guarantee you my paints are not that saturated and they don't come off as that white in person. So I'm kind of really looking forward to teaching in person again. This having to double explain everything is, I think I'm over it. Okay, so I have my first bright section here. Another high key area is here, this little wedge in between the two rolls. No, there's not too much interruption there. I know there's a cast shadow on the other side of this roll, but I think I'm going to paint up to that line. Again, your painting might be a little different than mine. I'm saving these rolling parts because there is going to be a little bit of blending going from light to kind of like shadowy. So we have two types of shadows, right? We have form shadow and then we have cast shadow. So the cast shadow is these solid edges over here, right, alongside our major shapes. And then the form shadow it's like the gradation of colors going from one area to another. So you can see on this roll, we have this bright white edge here, and then it rolls over to this murky kind of gray color, okay? And then it fades back into the white here. So that's how you get that form shadow, right? So we're going to be doing that. We're going to be putting in white and then mixing in that gray in one shot. So that's why I'm only finding the areas that have these solid white um, areas. If you want to add some other colors in there, you can see how there's like this greenish tinge to these areas. You just for visual interest, you can add some of that. I definitely did that on my version, my demo version, but for this one I might be a little bit more cautious. So I know this kind of fold had a really bright spot to it. In that flat area here. Now what you can do is like do like a dry brush effect where you lightly drag white along. Just so you don't have these big, sections of stark white versus, and you're creating these geometric shapes. Okay, so you can do, thick paint to very thin paint, and then you'll get that natural gradation there. So I know that's right here. All right, so I got a little bit of white paint over my fold line here. I could take my wet rag and just gently knock it back a little bit because I don't want to lose this line here. So with a wet rag or paper towel, you can remove paint. Just be gentle with it because you could actually scrape off the underpainting if you're too aggressive. There's a couple of highlights on the blanket here as it folds over the edge of the bowl. And also I'm going to hit the lip of this bowl. So the brightest part of the bowl would be kind of like the center to the left part over here. And we'll let the other, we'll add a little bit of white, like a thin amount to the right side. But we want the majority of the white over here on this edge because that'll reinforce that the bright light is on the left side. And as we move to the right side of the canvas, this is where our form shadows take over and our cast shadows are also, exhibited on this side. So the key to, I guess, really good representational art, well, I guess any art, it doesn't have to be just representational. Anytime you want to emphasize form, right? Things turning in space, it's maintaining the consistency of your light source. Okay, so just think of, all right, this my light is coming from here. I need everything on this side to exhibit that. And then, as it turns away, everything will be de-emphasized as far as lights and darks go. I'm going to start to work on this mess over here. So actually, if I get like a little check-in with the group, how are we doing with the lights on the leaves, oranges, and cloth so far?
On track here.
On track? How's everybody else doing? All right. I got a lot of shy watchers over here. Okay, so I'm going to go on to this fold over here, and once again, I'm going to go back to my source. All right, so you can see how these hot spots, right? So this is bright white here. Right before I was calling this in my head the cave, right? So there's like this little cave. Yeah, I really don't know what else to call it, but it's a good way to kind of landmark stuff. So there's a couple of rolls inside here. So you have 1, 2, and then this broad flat one here is 3. And then you have just the tip of the cloth over here, which is 4. Right, and you can see how on the left side of each fold, that's where your hotspot is on these two, right? You have that form shadow following the curve, and then this bright section over here. So the thing that's causing this curve right here would be the curve up here. All right, so this cave, the edge of the cave on the top is casting a shadow down here, giving us that round shape. And we're just getting just a bit of cast shadow. So this edge of this form here is being cast straight across here. So following this edge, shadow, right? And following this edge, we have shadow again. So let's maintain those shadows and find those really hot spots. All right, so I'm gonna grab some white. We already defined these last week. I'll put these in. And this may not be one and done. So after we start laying in some of our other colors, the white that we have now may not be as bright and as saturated as we want later on for the finished product. So this could be just our first lane. You could do another layer of white. So I'm using my flat brush because I want to do this fairly quickly. With the flat brush, you do have two edges. You have two corners, right? So the corners of your brush, you can kind of get in there and do some sharp detail if need be. So just like I did with that area up there, uh, there's a bright white area. So the cloth goes behind the table right here, but there's a cast shadow. So this three-dimensional shape is casting a shadow right next door. And then this is also pretty bright here. So this is also cloth. That's kind of bunched in the corner. Well, it's flat in the corner, but then it gets bunched right here. So I'm letting the underpainting be the lines defining the forms right now. And just so the edge of this cave is also catching the light. So I'm gonna take just the knife edge of my flat brush, and I'm gonna define just that bright edge right along there. Now, if you're not comfortable with that, you could always switch to your small round brush, something like this that you can control maybe just a little bit better. And I'm also going to add some white paint to the left side of these rolls here. I already know that they're going to be very high key colors. High key, meaning brightness. They're going to be, this is the brighter side of these forms. I'm going to add another layer of white here. Now, when you're putting down your brush strokes, try to be mindful of where you're beginning and where you're ending, just so that you're not, tap, tap, tap it all over the place, right? Have an intention set of what these brush strokes are going to be doing. And your brush strokes will be more cohesive. I know this goes in there. There's a shadow there. Okay, and I think that's pretty much as far as I want to take it with just the white alone. From here on out, we're going to be using colors. And that'll be like our part 2 of this session here. So any places that I know are going to get a lot of light, I can just add just a bit more white paint. As it dries, as my paint dries, it tends to get a little bit more translucent. I don't know why that really happens. I noticed that when I was using it, when I was painting the other, my demo version, that as I applied it, it looked opaque, and then I turned my back, and then as it dried, it became more see-through. I really didn't understand that, but I guess that's just getting to know the material, right? So this brand of paint tends to lose some of its opacity when it dries. So that could warrant a second or third layer of just the white alone. I'll leave that. So I guess we'll use this leaf as a case in point, right? So you can see how that's reflecting light a lot more than this here is. Now before they were just equated, right? So let me try to knock down the light. So this is with 2 layers of white. This is only 1 layer of white. So when I first did it, it looked super bright. And now as it dries, it becomes dimmer, right? So that kind of that kind of falls in line with what I said earlier about paints darkening as they dry. So when they're wet, I guess even with white by itself, will become darker as it dries. So in order to kind of combat that, we can add another layer. I don't want to get too obsessed with that because we can always add white to our colors as well. Like for instance, this lemon, we're not just going to put yellow by itself. Initially we will, but then as we want to build up that lighter yellow lemony color, we're going to be adding white to yellow and then adding that on top of this white that's already there. And it'll make it even brighter and more opaque and more reflective, right? So the white is meant to really reflect the light immediately. The deeper brown areas will absorb light more and reflect it, more slowly, which will help us accentuate those deeper areas. Okay, those crevices and all those shadowy areas. So the white is meant to combat that. We have light that's reflected more quickly because it's closer to the surface, and then the other colors that will penetrate and then reflect light more slowly. It'll give us that sense of three-dimensionality. All right, that's when you do things a la prima, all in one shot. So if you have like if you go to these paint and sip kind of class and you all have to do it all at once, you won't get that really sense of depth because everything is uniformly painted. Right? If you want that sense of depth, you really um, I think building up the layers, right, which is something that we've learned hundreds of years ago, but was kind of left to the wayside. Um, I guess just because representational art kind of fell out of favor with the art world, right? The world became in love with abstract expressionism and postmodern art, and a lot of these techniques were kind of put to the wayside, thinking they were either antiquated or just no longer relevant. Where art became more about exploring emotion and psyche and things of that nature. But I really think that all of those aspects of art can be explored through representational art as well, depending on how the paint is applied, subject matter chosen, paint strokes, right? You can, I believe these paintings are just as readable as any abstract painting. There's a huge resurgence of representational art. I think people just want to understand what they're seeing, right? They can form their own narratives. But when you need a mile long, a mile long explanation of what you're looking at, I feel like, I don't know, it's kind of counterproductive. All right, so it's 2:40 now. I'm gonna take a 3-minute break because I really do want to keep pushing the pace. I know this painting, it could take us a lot longer. This could easily be a 6-hour painting. But like I said, if we don't finish, you'll have a roadmap and idea of how to treat these paints and approach, you know, and you'll be able to complete it at your own pace. Right. So, all right, I'll be back in 3 minutes. All right. All right, so let's start off with the oranges. So I think the only color that we didn't pre-mix was orange. So now all we have to choose from is our yellow and red. So I'm going to take my yellow. I'm going to take this small amount of red, and now that's a pretty saturated orange. So this orange is a little too, well, it could be light enough. I guess we could start there. It's actually not bad. I thought it was a little dark to begin with. Just needs to be mixed some more. All right, so we don't need a whole hell of a lot of paint here because these are just like thin glazes that are going over, kind of like the foundation that we've already built. I am going to need some more yellow. So from this orange, I can actually make a lighter orange by just taking some of this and adding. So this is my dark orange. I pulled up just a little bit, and I took off some of that dark orange. I'm going to add some more yellow to it. And this will be my kind of like intermediate orange. Now again, it's nice that we're making our own orange because it will match the temperature and the behavior of all our other paints that we're mixing with this yellow. It's when we start to pull from 9 different tubes of yellow and orange, and we try to get them to work together, they don't always behave the same way. Some are translucent, some are more opaque, some are different temperatures, right? And what you can get is kind of something chaotic. So when you're mixing colors from a limited amount of like from a limited palette, if you're only working with 4, 5, 6 different colors and you're harmonizing everything, your painting is going to reflect that. If you have all different kinds of tubes of paint and you think the more the merrier, it might get you into some visual troubles. It might not work out. So all right, I'm going to take my round brush. You might have a flat brush, a small flat brush, either one. I'm going to start working on this orange. I'm going to work on this one front and center. And I'm going to start working from right to left. So I'm actually going to work from the darker areas to the lighter areas because I really want these light areas to sing. And the thing that's going to help that is this white paint that we laid underneath. So if we put our paints thinner on this side, the white will reflect much easier, right? On the deeper shadowy sides, if we put our paints a little bit more, thickly there, or our preliminary laying goes over here. As we progress this way, it'll be less and less paint. So naturally, we're going to build up more paint on the right side. So first color I'm going to pick up is the dark orange. Okay, loaded that on my brush. I'm going to start right in the shadow. Now it doesn't even look like I put anything. That's how translucent the colors are. But what I am doing is I'm transforming. If you could see it in person, they'd look a little bit more orange. The shadow areas, right? So as I move left, you'll see same color. I haven't changed anything. I actually have painting in the shadows. And then as I move left, you'll see it becomes lighter and lighter and lighter. Okay, so I have a natural gradient here. And from one color, right, from the preliminary work that I did, I'll zoom in just a little bit so you can see. I have a beautiful gradient with almost no effort at all. And that's simply because of the underpainting that we created. So any of those paint strokes that you applied before are really going to shine through still because this paint here is very translucent. See-through. It's like stained glass. Zoom out just a little bit. And I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to start in the shadow areas, give it a once over with the orange. And then I'm going to move into the light areas. Now I could pull back with the orange, like so. And as I move towards the even lighter areas, I can switch to my light orange. So I started with my dark orange, right? Now I'm going to switch to my light orange because these spots, right, especially on this orange, they're closer to the light source. So let's see what happens when I switch to that. I mean, it won't be a huge key change, right? Because it's still an orangey color. It's like a yellowish orange. You can still see there's a little bit of brightness, but we're not exactly done with those areas. So now I'm going to go up to, I grabbed the dark orange again. I went up to this orange here. I'm going to paint everything that I see that's in shadow first. So I want the oranges to kind of read in the shadows. And then mid-orange, mid shape here, right in the middle. I'm still working with the dark orange, and as I approach the light side, I'm going to pick up the light orange. So that yellowish orange, I switch from the dark orange to the yellowish orange, and now I get a beautiful bright side of that fruit there. Working on that gradient just a little bit more. Okay. All right. And continuing on. Dark orange first, starting in the shadow areas. I get that really high key spot here. So if this shadow of the leaf wasn't really there, there'd be another very bright, face of the orange there. Shadows will be painted orange. So it's just barely changing the brown that's there. Maybe some orange here. And then here in this spot, it was a very high key area. So I'm going to switch to the lighter yellowish orange. All right. Nice. Now for the lemon, I'm just going to grab yellow. I just want to start with yellow right off the bat. So actually I have orange on my brush. I'm going to wash that off just a bit. And now I'm just going to go to my yellow reservoir here. I'm going to pick that straight up, straight away. Now the yellow has a very high translucency to it. But I am going to paint the entire thing yellow. And you can see how it should appear brighter than the oranges. But since we started with yellow, there's really no transition that we have here. It's just kind of like this big, broad, light lemony yellow. It's like a flat area. But we know lemons have, three-dimensionality to it. There should be some kind of form there. So what we can do is We can add white to the yellow and make a much more pale yellow. So that I would be adding that to the left side here of my lemon. And now you can see the difference there. Now the lemon has some, changes in the form here. So there's this nub at the top. Then there's this secondary ring area between the nub and the main body of the lemon, right here. So you can add just a few brush strokes there. And then, of course, we have the broad side of this lemon. Now, citrus fruit has kind of like a waxy, almost a skin-like consistency to it. So you can really add some white here for reflection. Just tap that white in there and let it kind of play along with each other. Let's switch to maybe this overhead. Be a little bit better. Maybe not. So you can kind of see how the white is overlapped there on the lemon. Okay, and those oranges, lots of different taps, letting the brush strokes really kind of sing through. Okay. All right. Some other high key areas are the lip of the bowl. So I'm going to switch to the source real quick. All right, so you can see the lemon, the high lemon yellow, color also kind of feeds into the edge of the bowl here, right? You can see how those colors, they were mixed from the same yellow. They're very, very similar. So we're going to add that as well. And I believe the right side of the lip of the bowl here is also very similar to this lemon, but it doesn't seem quite as bright as this. So we want to add that there, but not quite as saturated as this lemon. I kind of want the lemon to be, have the spotlight there. Here's where it gets a little tricky over here. We didn't add white here. So if I was to add just yellow, the yellow it would barely make a difference. Okay. But we know that this yellow it's kind of, close to maybe the middle of the lemon. Not the bright side, but maybe the middle tone of that lemon is close to this one. So you would have to add a little bit of white to this lemon here, or to this yellow here, I mean. But if you do it thinly enough, the underpainting will sing through and it'll help us knock down that yellow. We don't want it to be as bright as the lemon. I'm going to continue to paint the lip. Now we did put some yellow, some white down here, so that will help to define that lip. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay. And we could even add a little bit of yellow down here on the other lip. And we'll let the underpainting help us define the correct color there. So I'm painting in the strokes that the bowl is shaped. So the bowl is kind of shaped like this. So my paint strokes are following that right? So I wouldn't want to do my paint strokes against the shape of the bowl or even just vertical plane shapes. I'm trying to match the edge of that bowl, and that will help define and make sense of that. You can see I changed my strokes for the bottom of the bowl, right? So I changed it to curved strokes down here to match that curved edge that I marked in there. It's too light. All right, looking good. All right, so I do want to start working above now. I think we could come back and work on the blanket and the bowl. That's as a secondary, as like an afterthought, because we still have to do this upper region here, and I really want to make that nice and defined. So it's 3 o'clock now, so I'm going to dedicate the majority of that to this up here because it is going to take some doing. And first thing I want to do is identify my darkest dark, which is this jug. So the jug has this nice blue, deep blue, greenish blue tinge to it, or at least I made it more so in mine. So you can see how the greens, they do kind of, you can see this highlight of green on the inside of the handle. You can see how some of that is mirrored down here, right? It kind of trails off to the bottom. There's just a little tinge of that up at the top and over here on the upper ledge. So even though it is very dark, there is a lot of visual interest going in there, and you can do it very subtly, right? But I do want to put this in, and you can see these voids also. They help to define the shapes of the leaves, and also the darkness helps to kind of anchor us when we're making choices of what's light and what's dark, right? So defining this darkest dark, I'm not so worried about the details on the handle and things like that. I'm aware of them, but I'm not really worried about them in the beginning because I'm mostly interested in defining this dark. It'll help me kind of fit the puzzle pieces going forward. So the color choices that I made where I took the blue, I wanted to make like an inky blue green. All right, so you take some of this green here, and our phthalo blue is a very dark color to begin with. We could even taken this green color here and added some blue to it, but I decided to make a new green, right? And I'm going to apply that dark blue. I have my round brush here, and I'm just going to start to lay it in. Now, the other color that was very prevalent, it seemed to be, was black. But I don't want to add in black just yet. I want to get in this kind of blue first. And I didn't want it to just be blue by itself. I wanted it to have some green to it, right? Because that's the predominant color in this painting. So having blue by itself would be kind of jarring. So we're going to knock that blue down by adding some green to it. Although right now on camera it does look very blue. In person, there is a greenish tinge to it. I'm going to, in between the leaves, right, these dark shapes that I created before, I'm going to make sure to paint those now with color, right? We omitted those before. And we have our jug. Cool. All right, so for the, I'm gonna just add a little bit more paint to this. Now for the black, now wherever I find these, deep crevices, right? So there's a leaf here meeting another leaf. So there's very little light getting in there, very little light in here, very little light towards these edges. So I'm going to really focus on adding black in a limited amount to that area there. And so you can see in these deep areas, these deep recesses, very solid dark colors. But towards the edges where light is kind of creeping around the forms, you can see that's where we get our other colors shining through, right? And these greens are probably reflected from the leaves around it. So any of the greens that we use to create the leaves, you can add those as highlights to the jug. Right now, let's keep it going with the black. So my black formed a little skin over it. That's okay. So now once we add the black, you should be able to see how much darker. Now I'm tapping it in because I do want some variety of brush strokes. I don't want any flat, dark, you know, shapes. I want there to be movement in my brush stroke because I mentioned that earlier where I was kind of like too stiff with my painting and it came out to be overall just a little bit stiffer than I hoped it to be. So there was a little bit of shadow here. Dark recesses, adding black paint. And I know it might be a little hard to show you on this wide shot. I'm going to move in just a little bit closer to see if those colors come through better. Right, so let's switch. Still looks pretty dark. But where I have the black paint and the other paint, there was a lot of play of color. Let me see if I can increase the exposure here. Well, let's get way up there. There you can see the difference in paint strokes now. So I have my really deep dark right here in the crevices, and then you can see the separation of the lighter areas and the darker areas. Now the camera, I mean, the best cameras in existence are your eyes, and you're able to differentiate colors and lights and darks much better than cameras can transmit as of right now. So in person, this reads just like it does here, but you can see how overblown everything else is. I had to increase the exposure of the camera way higher than normal, just so you can see, for yourself through the camera. Whereas in person, it's no problem. The eye will pick it up right away. All right. Okay. All right. That looks good. All right, so now we're going to start working on the leaves themselves. Let's try that first yellow green that we made. All right, so that was this guy right here. Okay, so we're going to take that yellowish green. So we can even add a little bit more yellow to it. Make it really kind of like a punchy, yellowish green. And that's going to be our bright green. We're going to start right here and we're going to jump straight into it. Now you can see when you put the paint on too thickly, you get very blotchy kind of colors, All right, so you want to spread that out as evenly as you can, just so you don't get that blotchiness. Okay, and you can spread that paint out along the length of the leaf. Now we could add a little bit of white to that green, but here's what's going to happen. It's going to turn a grayish green. So we take this high key green and we add white to it. It takes on like a grayish kind of property there. The way to combat that would be to add more yellow. Right, if it becomes too gray, right, that white will just knock it down. Maybe even add a little bit more green. Adding green will make it, darker. So if you're adding white to make it lighter, and it doesn't get and it turns gray, like a grayish green, add more yellow to it, and that'll bring more life to it. So let's see what happens. So you can see how our strokes appear to be more solid because white is opaque, and white will give it the appearance of being solid. But if you go over with that paint with white into the shadow areas, it may just absolutely dominate the shadows, and now you no longer have a shadow. So it's a really careful dance you have to do between translucent and opaque paints. Anything you mix with white is going to want to just dominate and just lay over it flat. Right? So our translucent paints work great for the shadow areas. So here's a transparent green over a shadow. And now they work together. The translucent paint is letting the darker underpainting read through the bottom, and it's coming out reading as a shadow. But the paint with white lays on it, really flatly on top. It gives you a nice even tone of paint, but it's literally covering anything that it touches. So like the spine of the leaf, if you were to take that green with white and put it over the spine would disappear. Right? So you have to be careful where you're putting paints with white. That's I guess that's the biggest takeaway. So I'm going to take my light green and I'm going to paint over the second leaf down here, this nice bright leaf. And I'm going to continue finding any of the light areas, any of the areas that I did with white, any of the leaves. I'm going to take my light green and I'm going to hit those areas first. So this is the leaf above the lemon I'm working on now. If that's not the one you're working on, that's okay. We're all kind of heading in the same direction. I'm going to jump up here. I know that's pretty light. I'm kind of choosing the ones that are easiest to explain and understand. Because this leaf here is a little bit harder. So the one that's closest to the lip of the jug right here, this leaf down here goes into extreme dark into light color here. I'll show you on the right. So you can see this medium green. So this is kind of like the green that you're starting out with. It's that really high key green, right? So this is probably what you got out of the tube, more or less. And then it goes into this inky dark green down here, right? So it goes from the shadowy green, which is we have, a separate mixture for, and it goes into a middle green, right? So I'm going to leave that for last. I'm just identifying the easiest leaves to do. So I'm doing all these light areas first, and then we'll go to the trickier areas. Now, some of these green leaves that I'm doing appear too yellow. So I'm adding a little bit more green to them, especially these two guys. They appear very yellow. They appear too similar to the lemon. Let's see what I can do about that. I think once I put uh, the other darker leaf colors, I think it'll read better. I just very lightly covered mine with this green. That looks a little bit better. And using multiple layers tends to give paintings a lot of visual interest. So I really don't mind going over an area more than, more than once. It doesn't have to be one and done. I am by no means a master, so I'm always experimenting and testing and trying out different things. I'm just using my best judgment. If you don't like something, you can always let it dry and then, paint over it. Because in theory, if we don't like any of the leaves that we've done, you could take the white paint and kind of paint over this, and then kind of give yourself a fresh start. But I mean, we really don't have a whole heck of a lot of time. But I hope that you guys are choosing to do painting on your own, and when you do that, when you're in the driver's seat right from the get-go, you guys, you have total control. You can take as much time or as little time as you want. All right, so for this green here, I'm going to use that green right out of the tube, that green oxide. It seemed to be like a pretty good tone that I needed for there. But for your green, you might have to add a little bit of red to it to knock it down, to give it like a little bit more of a muted color. All right, so I hit all my high leaves there. Now I'm going to switch to the more, wait, did I forget one? Let's see. Yeah, all right, so this little sliver here, I think I missed that one. There's a little bit of that light green here also. But after that, I'm going to go to my middle greens. Actually, you know what? No, I'm not going to go to the middle greens. I'm going to switch to the darker greens after that. After this last light pass of green, I'm going to identify. This one. I think I added an extra leaf in here when I did my drawing. So I'm going to finagle it, add in a little bit of light paint there. All right, so if you're adding or subtracting in your painting, that's perfectly fine. You are the boss of your painting. Okay. next thing I'm going to do is identify the dark green leaves. Okay, so that dark green that we established early on. So we mixed that yellowish green that was here, which I obliterated that puddle. This was that bluish green that we started. So I took my green and added just a bit of blue to it to make this guy here. I'm going to use this to start my dark leaf kind of discovery here. So if you look at the darkest areas, right? So they're the ones that with the deepest brown on them, right? And even the shadowy areas and this leaf kind of hiding under this leaf, we're going to hit all of those leaves with this bluish green that we established early on. Okay. Now, even though it's pretty dark, it has, the translucency. We're letting the brown of the underpainting influence the color, the secondary color of this green. So it's actually appearing much deeper than what it actually is. Because if you were to put this on, say, the background, it would look like teal cellophane. So I think I could do it up here. So if I did it up here, right, it's very light and very teal, right? Doesn't have a lot of saturation. But when you overlap it on something very dark, it's a whole nother ball game, right? And we're using that fact. So that's our whole thesis, right, for this painting. So now any dark area in the leaf area, in the leaf, I'm hitting with this blue green. In the really, really dark areas, right, we can even add a tinge of black to get a very deep shadow. Because again, the camera is making this color seem a lot inkier and a lot darker than it actually is. And for the shadowy areas, a little touch of black will really push the darkness even further. Okay. Let's see. This guy. Right? And I also said, since we're working with the dark green, but this leaf here, it goes from the dark green up to a middle green, medium green. So I'm going to begin this with the dark green. And I stopped about halfway. Now, without cleaning my brush, I'm going to grab that green oxide and I'm just going to start painting the top part of the leaf. And right where they overlap, right, we have that line. I'm going to start doing short brush strokes right on that line, dancing right on that line. They're only about half-inch size brush strokes right over that line, and I'm blending them into one another. So some of that some of that underpainting is starting to come through, which is fine. That gives us some visual interest. But if you don't want that, if that's not your cup of tea, you can wait till it dries and add another layer of that and mix that in. All right. Sometimes I tend to underwork things just because I like to see what it looks like, almost like a work in progress, like incomplete, paintings, or I don't know, for some reason that intermediate area, where something's in between being finished and 100% finished and being undone. I've always liked that look. It's not, it's not for everybody. So that's why I say you might have to go back, and if that's what you want, a more finished look, you would just simply add more layers of paint. All right, so for the darker areas of the leaf, increase the exposure. Oh, okay. All right, so for these areas underneath the leaf where there's overlap, I'm going to be taking a little bit of black. Okay. So without cleaning my brush, I just grabbed a little bit of black. I made a little pile right here. Maybe a little, just a couple swipes. I'm going to take that inky, that bluish green that we made, add a little bit of the black. So it shouldn't look totally black. We just want a very inky kind of dark green. And I'm going to be adding that along the edge. Right, you can break up your brush strokes slightly just so it's not an outline. And I'm adding that to the leaf shadow. Anywhere I see overlap, right? Overlap would be where the greatest amount of shadow is taking place, right? That's where the least amount of light is kind of bouncing. And I'm just kind of shading it in. Short, choppy strokes. So the spine of this leaf is actually the underpainting, right? I didn't add any paint there. It's actually the omission of paint that gives you that kind of that spine look there. I'm going to add just a little bit of that darkness to the bottom of this leaf. To me, it's still a little too bright. I really want to look like it's going into deep shadow there. It's really being obscured. Not trying to lose the shape of my orange there. Short, choppy brush strokes so to blend them in. Now it looks like that leaf is really curving out of, darkness, coming into light, and then going up into, that intermediary light. There was a couple of inky blue, blue-green leaves up here. So I know there was one going into the jug or like just above the jug here. The other half of this leaf is kind of in darkness. And since I kind of invented this by accident, I'm going to add one here too. So it kind of looks like these two shapes mirror each other. So in my drawing, I thought I was drawing two, but I was actually looking at one, and I drew it, twice. So I drew the same leaf twice. That's why they look very similar to each other. So I just ran with it. Then up here, actually no, we'll leave that for later. Okay. Next, we're going to go for these middle green leaves. So we have our darkest leaf, we have our lightest leaf. Now we're going to find a green in between, and we're going to hit those. So let's do a time check, 3:30. Okay. All right. So the middle green. So we had actually made a green earlier, right? So we said with the yellow and the blue, we're going to make a separate green. We're going to try that green just so that it's not anywhere near our first green or our yellow green or a blue green. It's going to be a totally different green. And that's really going to differentiate the type of green that we're seeing. So, oh wow, that's very translucent. Wow. All right, so I'm going to add just a little bit of white to that. And you guys should already know that means I'm going to be increasing the opacity. So I just took a little bit of white, added it here, and you can see how it got lighter. And in order to not let it get too light, I just keep adding green until I'm happy with the darkness of it, right? I don't want to be, this is where I started. I don't want it to be too far from where I started. It will be lighter because that's just what white paint does to colors, right? Increases opacity, but it also lightens them. So if we can let some of that, if we do it thinly enough, we'll let that underpainting kind of sing through for us, help us out. Let's see what happens up here. Okay, so you can see it's somewhere in between the other the other greens that we created. I can put a little bit on this leaf. So now if it appears, now I took that same green that same green that we did over here, and I just put it, I just dabbed a little bit on top of this leaf here, right? You could put it in some other places, just slightly, and that'll help us to harmonize our colors and our painting choices here. Maybe sort of at the top of this leaf, show some gradation. And I think the other side, so this leaf had two sides. It was a light side and a shadow side. I just picked up one of the dark greens here, and I'm just gonna paint this inside very quickly. There we go. So you can see I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, right? Going from one leaf to the next, different greens, until I'm going to be, somewhat satisfied with the all the leaves. That as long as all the leaves get colored with some kind of green, right? And you could take your time, later on, maybe fine tuning the green that you chose. There's one other leaf that has no paint on it here. Actually, these two little guys too. These two guys were interesting to color. I'll point that out. But I'm going to finish this one over here with that middle green again. So it's not a dark green. It's not a super light green. It's kind of somewhere in between. So temperature, when you're talking about color, temperature can be an interesting thing. It could be almost arbitrary because you could say, well, we're going to do a cool green over here, and we can do a warm green over here. It's very interesting when you start to introduce temperatures, color temperatures. And just going to add a little bit of that middle green to these other leaves along the edges, because usually that's where there's some darkness to them. They're not just one flat green. And these little brown kind of like spikes were meant to be shadows. So the leaf has a little bit of curl to it, and on the back side of the curl, so there's the top of the hill, and then the under curl there is a shadow, right? All right, so let's see the original. So here, these curls here, you can see there's a dark green on the, or in these valleys, right? The hill has the highlight and the valley over here has the shadow on the backside. So we kind of mark those out with our underpainting. But if we need to add just a little bit of more green, we could take that middle green and add that in over the underpainting there to accentuate. So that when we zoom out, they have a little bit more curl to it. And like I said, um, you can always kind of reassess that as we go along. All right, I'm going to move on. There's a little leaf in here. I know that that leaf was like a yellowish green. So I'm just, and it was very bright for some reason. So I'm just going to add some paint in here. When that dries, I'll add some of that green on the bottom and the shadow. That's the best part of this is that once you become familiarized with the translucency of the colors, glazing, and how to use white to build up, opaque solid areas and glaze with it, you can go back and forth and create some really nice effects there. So this is just one big experiment. It had a lot of things going for it as far as uh, learning moments or teaching moments. All right, so I want to move on to and get some visual information on the cloth, because the cloth does have a lot of character to it and a lot of color change. So you can see the colors have bluish, the shadows I should say, have like a bluish grayish tinge to them. And you can make a really beautiful gray with our primary colors. We're going to try to do that now. So that will be our blend and our shadow colors for this. So you can see the temperature like in this fold right here, looks like the arch. I've been calling it the arch. As you get closer to the top of the arch, you can see how it's a deeper gray. And down below we have a lighter gray. Well, this lighter gray is just this darker gray probably mixed with a little white. So we're going to try to make a reservoir of this deep gray here. And then if we need lighter tones of it, we're just going to be adding white to that deeper gray color. Okay. And when we zoom out, it all becomes very cohesive. Okay, so let's try to make that gray color. Let me zoom this out. I'm going to try to move this in. A little bit sharper. Not so much. Okay, let's go to the palette. Anytime you mix a gray, you're going to need, actually, I think the best part would be to start with just red and blue. For some reason, you would think it would get purple, but you normally get like a deep kind of gray. All right, so I'm going to put some red and yellow, red and yellow. I'm going to put some red and blue. And you'll notice I'm going to get a warm, inky kind of dark purplish color. Kind of looks like grape jelly. All right, this version that it's like a wine color also, like a merlot or something. All right, and if I add white to that, becomes like a grayish purple color. Now we know so here when you add white, you kind of reveal the true color, right? Well, not the true color, or the because the true color, it was that Merlot kind of color. That purple tends to sing now, right? It's not the same kind of purple that comes out of a tube. The tube purple are either chemically created, or they're taken from minerals in the earth, which transmit a much more saturated purple. This is a very muted grayish kind of purple. Now, if I wanted to neutralize this, if we look on the color wheel, right across from purple is yellow. So I'm going to take a little bit of yellow. Now, if I add this, it might turn into like a murky kind of brown. Yeah, there we go. All right, so I didn't neutralize the whole thing, which is good. So I'm going to add a little bit more yellow. Now, the more yellow that I add, the warmer it becomes, the closer to gray it's going to look. That's kind of like what we're shooting for. And it's still too purple. Yeah, it's more of like a very warm gray. Now, if I had started with like yellow and red, it may have been too warm. I wanted it to be fairly deep. Now, I could take a little bit of blue, right? And then take some of this and make a darker version of that. Let's see what we get. All right, so this looks a little too green. So that's why I did a small version. I wanted to experiment a little bit. Well, now that I mixed it through, you get a much darker grayish version, right? So I hope by you guys seeing me use the palette knife, you can see how versatile these things are and how useful they can be when mixing paint. I did that fairly quickly, and I didn't have to clean a brush, and it's a very flat surface. It's super, super useful. I mixed this color and this color within just a couple of swipes of the palette knife. Whereas using a brush, you would have to clean off the brush, and you'd have to mix massive amounts just to save most of it on the palette, because the brush would be soaking it up. All right, so let's take this middle gray and this dark gray here, and let's start putting some shadows on the cloth. Okay, so I'm going to switch to a medium flat, something like this, because we do have some broad, very kind of geometric shapes here, and using the round brush would, maybe for the closer areas here, we could use that, but for the most part, we want to stick with the maybe something a little bit larger to muscle our way through it. All right, so looking at the all right, so big areas that are very, I guess, uniform. So this shadow edge along the bowl, this shadow in here, and this fold of the cloth, the shadows here that are on this side of the bowl of the cloth, this area here that's right next to the cave area, right? We have this shadow shape here. We have the shadow shapes. We can hit all of that with pretty much the same shadow color. And we're going to do that with that lighter shadow color. So I'm going to load my brush. I'm tapping, 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 flip, tap, tap, tap. Whenever you load your brush, remember, always try to keep the paint no more than halfway up the bristles, because you really don't want to use any more of the brush than that. Once the paint gets up here, it's pretty much unusable. So if you do get paint up here, make sure that you're wiping your brushes clean or thoroughly washing them in the cup there. All right, so I know there was a strong shadow right along the edge of our bowl. In here, along the bowl edge. inside the folds. And I'm kind of going through this quickly, but like I said, you guys are going to have the blueprint and then you'll be able to dial in a little bit more carefully afterwards. And there's a little bit of shadow underneath that fold there as well. Inside here, so here I'm going to be careful not to paint over my lines. So I have some lines here from my original drawing. And I don't want to paint over it with my gray, so to speak. Now this gray does have some translucency to it because there's no white in it, right? It's mostly red and blue. And with a little bit of yellow. We did not add white to it. Well, I did add white to the lighter gray. I know I have to correct myself there. But not that much. Okay. Where else did I say? I think there's some in here as well. Although this had a much lighter, inside this fold here, right? This curl, there was a shadow here, but it wasn't quite as deep as the other ones, but I feel like we should just get it going anyway. And let's see, I guess along here. So I'm not starting with the darkest shadow value. Well, to be honest, just slightly out of fear. And once you make a decision, sometimes it's hard to go back. So you can always make something darker with paint. It's really hard to go back the other way. It's like once you commit, it's like you own it. So I'm starting with a lighter shadow color, which will be easy to build up after the fact. So now the more tricky areas, right, are these folds. So the right half of this, right, is in shadow because the light is pushing in from the left and casting shadows on the right. So I'm going to put a line of paint here to show the shadow of this tube. Now what I can do is, since I already have that color on my brush, I can take a little bit of white, right, without cleaning the brush, and I can put it right in between those two colors and kind of dance right on that line to create a gradient. Okay, same thing here. I already have that dark color kind of on my brush, so I can lay that in here. And you can see that harsh transition here. I'm going to pick up some white. And I'm going to put it right on that transition line, right 50-50. You can see half my brush is on the left, half my brush is on the right. And I'm going to paint back and forth on that line until it looks fairly, blended. If I didn't get it the first time, I'm going to reload my brush and try again. Put some more white right on the tip. I'm going to find that transition line. And I'm going to back and forth until I'm happy. And he has a nice little transition there. Okay. It's not perfect, but that's the general idea. There's a little bit of shadow here. Too dark here. Right, so right along that arch here. So I wanted to show like this progression, right, around this going up to the arch, not just a short, a jagged change in direction here. So okay, and the same thing along here. So there's a curl here. These are the things that require a lot of practice and trial and error. So if you don't get it the first try, it's a little frustrating. It doesn't. These things are like kind of like hard fought techniques. You gotta like fight for it. Keep trying until you get it. Especially these mixing on the canvas techniques. They're a bit tricky. All right, so there was more shadow up here around our lemon. Trying not to get too much white get in my shadows. So if you go back into the shadow shapes, I just noticed that I still had white on my brush, so that made my shadow shapes very opaque. So you can see the more translucent colors here, how they're working with the underpainting, but over here you can see how they're much flatter. That's night and day right there. You can see the difference right away, right? So you have those translucent kind of colors playing with each other very nicely, and here the white is just obliterating the underpainting. Um, but that's okay. I'm doing it, and hopefully you aren't not. um, Also, I haven't really included because it's probably the easiest step, but you could take either some dark blue or black even, or black and blue mixed together and just do this shadow shape down here. I think this is the darkest shadow of the whole painting. This is a little off target. I'm not done with the cloth, but I just noticed for the first time we skipped this area down here. Probably didn't even think about it just because it's so kind of easy just to lay it in. It's just a straight bar of dark paint. So whatever you decide, black or blue or both. That's the bottom. Let's see, nice and inky. So you give a nice sharp edge at that bottom of the table. All right, back to the shadows of the cloth. Let's see. I think this is going to be our last, 5 minutes. We're going to be taking that dark. We have the dark gray here now. So now we're really going to kind of let these middle shadow colors, they're going to start to really sing because we're going to be putting in the darker colors, right? So here in that cave area, if I start to put it towards the top and I'm following the shapes of the folds, right? I'm curving with them. And I'm really trying to accentuate the difference between the deep shadow, maybe wipe some of that away, and the preliminary shadow at the edge, right? And the deepest shadow here of this of this curve up here. There's a crease in here. Put some more shadow in there. So any place there's a crease or very deep shadow. So where this fold sits on this other fold here, I could put a little thin line of shadow, and that'll help accentuate how deep and strong that shadow is. What I don't want to do is completely cover the shadows that we did initially. We're only doing a small amount. The amounts that are very obscured by light, we're going to let this deep shadow color right. So now you can see in the shadow area, we have two different shadow colors. We have like this warm shadow color and this cool shadow color. And the cool shadow color represents really deep shadow, and the warm shadow represents form inside of the shadow shapes. So even though light is not directly hitting inside these shadow areas, we can still see three-dimensionality, right? There's still a play of light and dark. We just have medium darks and then really dark darks, right? And then you can use this technique to kind of help you define your shadow shapes, right? So we can do a deep along this line, a deep shadow line here, right? Showing you where there's a crease, a really deep crease. Now, if you don't include that anywhere else, now it looks like it just accentuates how deep that fold is. Whereas here, we're not going to do that because there's a more gradual bend to this, right? Up here, we said there was a deeper shadow up here. At the top of this arch, there's less shadow penetrating. Okay. There was a shadow in here somewhere. I don't know if I defined it 100% in this drawing, but I know it's there. There's a little fold. I'm going to add some deeper shadows here, right around here, along the bowl again. Trying to work on that gradient a little bit. Down here inside the bowl with I guess another important thing to point out is that this is the shadow colors for the cloth. The shadow colors for the oranges and maybe even the bowl would be closer to brown. Okay, so you don't want to use this shadow color for every shadow. Just like we did two different shadow colors over here on the table and on the wall, we have a bluish shadow and then we have a greenish shadow. But it's the shadow of the jug. Okay? They're just defined by two different colors. Same shadow cut into two different family colors. Same thing here in the cloth. You have your grayish kind of like made from blues and red, but the shadow color of the fruit should be closer to browns. All right, we can go to the original painting to show the difference there. We can add just a little bit, I guess, inside here. I think I want to show this transition a little bit better. That didn't translate so well, so I'm going to put a little bit of that. See if I can change that. Yeah, knock that down just a little bit. Anytime you have a shadow shape, a shadow cast over something that's round, make sure that you're curving the shadow over those little shapes, no matter how small. So this is a very thin sliver of fabric that's folded in here, that's kind of wedged. And I still added a little bit of curve to it just to show that the shadow is climbing over. Anytime you cut a shadow straight across something, you are flattening out that object, okay? So that pretty much takes us to the end here. If you want to push anything further, I would suggest that everybody should have, who's working on this paint, you should have the original, right? And you just want to, take the time to study the subject. Like we didn't really get to do this bowl, but it's really just browns and a little bit of the greens with white mixed in. And you can just kind of experiment with this here. Any other sections that you want to push further, like if you can look at the crevices in between the oranges, you can see how it's a very deep orange, a deep brown. So to get a deep brown, right, you would mix your yellows and reds and then add a little bit of blue at a time to get until you get a very, nice brown color. And then you can start to do that. And any further work on the stems and the leaves, it would just be observation. You know how to mix your colors, add them in. Try to keep your uh, translucency in the brown of the branch. You really don't need any white in the branches because we did a pretty good job of preserving that in the preliminary drawing. So if I zoom in, so a lot of the branch is still just underpainting, right? And then any other colors, I would just be adding darker colors to the underneath or the undersides of the branches, just to give it a little touch of three-dimensionality. Oh, forgot this little nub of the orange. Let's see if we can add that really quick. I'm just gonna take this light gray here and put it right on top. Some dark gray. And anybody have any questions about what we did today?
I
I know this is
thoroughly
kind of
enjoyed the class, Sam. Thank you so much.
no
Very
problem.
instructive.
Anybody's has
Thank
this been
you.
their first attempt at this kind of painting before?
I did one other class with you before.
Right.
With the
Yeah.
with the slices of
Oh,
apples.
wow. All right, yeah. So this is like a quantum leap compared to some of the stuff that we've done in the past. This was like a heavy duty kind of approach to painting. But I enjoy it just because it lets me study the subject all that much more, and the more informed the painting can be, I feel like the more successful you can be at doing a good copy or a good version of whatever that you're trying to interpret. But that's pretty much it I have for today. It's 4:05. We're just about out of time.
Thank you.
You're most welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, happy painting, guys. I hope it comes out great. And does anybody want to hold up what they're working on? I haven't seen too many
It
pictures.
doesn't look anything like
Right.
painting, but it is my interpretation.
Good.
Really nice.
Wow. Excellent job, Dima. Awesome.
Nice, Dima.
Thanks, Sam.
Nice, Robin.
Great.
All right. All right, everybody. I'll see you next time. Next time you guys see me, I'll probably be a dad. I'm down to 2 weeks. My wife is due on the 21st.
Wow.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. So I hope
So
you
we're
guys have
taking a
some fun
break for a
painting.
few months.
Yeah, and I'll see you next time.
Okay, let us know when it is.
I will.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye,
And
everybody.
congrats. Bye-bye.
Thank you.